groups that are, some of them just for act, saying death to America, where most Iranians are very favorable toward the United States. I think it's very important in our public diplomacy that we don't gratuitously insult Iranians. That just feeds the hardliners. And they're dying out. And as the new generation takes over, I see the potential for extremely good relationships between the United States and Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. David Trone.
The most important thing is to protect our most important ally, Israel, in the Middle East. They're the bedrock. But that said, the Iranian deal is a good deal, the right deal. I'm proud of the president for making that deal. But with Iran, we have a very unstable, untrustworthy partner. John Kerry perhaps should have pushed harder. Perhaps we could have got a better deal. But sometimes when you want a deal too much, and I've done a lot of negotiations in business, you accept the deal and you don't push it to the limit and maximize your advantages at that time, which we've now given up. So trust but verify is the key with this. And with the Iranians, it's really verify, 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 because there's not much trust.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. David Anderson.
I was opposed to the Iran nuclear deal. A false choice was given. It was the deal or war. 200 times in American history, Congress has rejected an agreement or a treaty, and in many of those cases, the treaty was redone. So last summer, when this was negotiated, that was a false choice. My chief concern, actually, was the $100 to $150 billion, which was going to be used, we all thought, for terrorism and also for conventional war. Just this week, right, the Iranians broke another deal with us. Not this deal, but they're testing ballistic missiles at the same time that they're still chanting, death to the United States, death to Israel. I sided with Senator Ben Cardin against the deal and served on the American Jewish Committee's Washington board for 10 years, and my views still align with the American Jewish Committee.
The moderator thanks Mr. Anderson for injecting a note of dissent in what otherwise would have been a uniform response to the question.
Can we respond to the dissent?
No, thank you. Will Jawando.
Thank you. So I'll start with where Dave ended. The economic empowerment that came through the funds to Iran is actually what is going to help the new voices and the young people in Iran who, as was mentioned, like America, a lot of them. If you're going to empower people, you let them get out of poverty, and you don't continue to foment young men of color who have no opportunity, who are going to hate who they think is responsible. So I was so proud to be a part of this Obama administration because we've improved our standing in the world. And this was just the latest example of him taking 80-20 with strong enforcement provisions so that we can make sure that we have snapback and the other things we need in our arsenal to keep them on to task. The other thing I'll say is the alternative was war. And so that's not a good scenario. If you listen to Trump and them, they want to go to war. They all said in their debate the other night they want to send troops overseas to Syria and other places. So that's not going to improve America.
Thank you, Mr. Jawando. Okay, so now we will go on to questions submitted from the audience. And we'll be starting this round of responses with Kathleen Matthews. This is on a general question on poverty and homelessness. This question is from a Hood College sophomore who did not provide further identification. In too many political events, discourse about homeless advocacy is very rare. What is your plan for raising the extreme poor out of poverty in the United States? And I would add an additional question. Would you be willing to push for tax increases to pay to raise, to help reduce homelessness and raise the extreme poor out of poverty? Kathleen Matthews.
We need to fortify the safety net in this country, and that will require more revenues and therefore more taxes. What's happened in this country is that over the past 15 years, we've seen stagnant wages. The minimum wage has not budged since 2008. We see more immigrants coming into this country being paid unfair wages because they're not part of the formal economy. And we haven't seen the investment in health care, health research at NIH, health research at the National Institutes of Mental Health, And we know with the homeless there is high incidence of mental illness. This is an issue I have been very deeply involved with since I first came to Washington in the 1970s when we created in D.C. some of the very first shelters for the homeless with Mitch Snyder. It's an area where I have been invested as a board member of Catholic Charities, which is one of the largest providers of homeless services, and it's an area that our government has not sufficiently addressed. We've got to rebuild the middle class, and we've got to make sure we fortify the safety net.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. Delegate Gutierrez.
Poverty has been growing in the United States at incredible rates. I think none of us ever expected that that would be what would be happening under our own watch, and yet it has. I really do respect Bernie Sanders for raising this issue as his #1 priority of looking at the distribution of wealth, looking to see what this country's policies have done to increase the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. I come from a country that was an oligarchy that has always ignored that human beings are living in incredible conditions of poverty. Women, tip workers, all of those are individuals that we must address. We've tried to at the state of Maryland, but I think so far we have failed. We have increased the minimum wage, but we ignored the women and the children that are the highest representation in our poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Gutierrez. Senator Raskin.
Well, we've got to address this at different levels. At one level, we've got to address it from the perspective of people who are at the bottom of the wage scale in America. And in Maryland, I helped lead the fight for an increase in the minimum wage, which we got done a couple of years ago. We need to increase the minimum wage nationally. That's an absolute imperative for the country. The second thing is we've got to revive the right to organize. You know, economic growth has been going up in America. Even through the crisis in 2008, it's been going up, but wages and benefits have remained stagnant. The distance between where the economy is and where the middle class is the distance of inequality. And we've seen with the decline in wages, the decline of unions. We've got to restore and revive the right to organize, and we've got to restore progressivity to our income tax structure to make it real, including a tax on Wall Street financial transactions.
Thank you, Senator Raskin. Delegate Barve.
One of the reasons I'm unapologetic about being a Democratic leader in the Maryland General Assembly is because of the fantastic work we've done to alleviate income inequality. We passed I was the floor leader for passing the minimum wage in the House. I was the floor leader and prime architect for making the tax code more progressive in the state of Maryland. I also worked to close hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate tax loopholes so that we would have more money to put into education, to put into programs that benefit many people, including the homeless. And because we were able to make the tax code more progressive and I was able to close corporate tax loopholes, we froze tuition in the University of Maryland system for 4 years in a row. That's Democratic leadership.
Thank you, Delegate Barbe. Dan Bowling.
I would not expect anyone in this room to believe that a red state would increase the minimum wage last year. So please go on my website and read The Atlantic and Politico and NPR and see how when you take out the party leadership from the legislature and allow members of the legislature to vote based upon the merit of bills and not upon the party affiliation of the sponsor, that they actually do smart things, even if they're Republicans. The Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs, of which I'm a member as a Quaker, no less, last year succeeded in functionally eliminating the homelessness of veterans in Montgomery County, which means that any new homeless veteran will be housed quickly, his or her homelessness will be short, and in 2016 the goal is to extend that to all homeless in Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. David Trone.
This is my third day in a week in Frederick. On Friday, I was over at the Frederick Food Bank with other Democrats, working with the folks that really are struggling to make ends meet. It's a total national disgrace what we have in America toward our homeless, the poverty. America is the richest country in the world, needs to reach out. We have to do a lot better. we have to do an awful lot better. And that's going to mean absolutely raising the minimum wage, definitely indexing it to inflation so it continues to go up. It means more taxes for the wealthy. I need to pay more taxes. That's a good thing. It also needs more research at places like NIH, where the budgets were 34% of requests in 1999, and now they're down to 17% this year.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. David Anderson.
I want to address poverty in Frederick and Carroll County. I've actually been to the two counties, to 14 towns, 43 times to knock on doors. You are a central part of my campaign. Here is my recommendation. The issue is about jobs and how jobs are related to housing and transportation. A central issue you have now is how can we get down to Montgomery County or to Washington with the transportation and transit issues to work in those federal agencies. I propose bringing federal agencies up to Frederick and Carroll County, especially federal emergency relocation centers. All the agencies have to build these centers, and there's a dispersal theme to move them further away from DC. We can bring jobs up here so that people don't have to just solve the problem of going south for the jobs to Montgomery.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Will Juando.
The basic American promise is that if you work hard, play by the rules, you can have a good life. That's slipping away for too many because of special interests. One of my main premises of my campaign is that we need people that actually understand what working families are going through in Congress. If you talk about child care, it's a national disgrace that we don't subsidize child care. $2,000 a month down where I live, maybe $1,200, $1,400 here. Paid family and sick leave. You have people literally deciding whether they can keep their job or not if a child or a family member gets sick because they don't have it. Only 12% of people have access to that type of leave, a disgrace. Our tax system needs to be more fair. We need to make sure that the high earners are paying their fair share and that it's more progressive. You've heard that as well. But a basic premise is that with a Congress and where 53% of the people there are millionaires, why don't we send someone who actually knows what people are going through to Congress to get this done?
Thank you, Mr. Juando. Joel Rubin.
Helping people get out of extreme poverty and homelessness, it requires a government that is allowed to function. And that means a government that's not shackled up like it currently is with the sequester and with an overwhelming bias towards spending on national security rather than domestic programs. Our budget priorities are out of whack. I'm the only candidate here who has national security experience at the federal level who can get under that hood, dig into the budget, find the cost savings on weapon systems that don't protect our security and waste tens of billions of dollars and move that in the right direction. That's what we need to be doing. We need to make sure that our government is actually allowed to perform and work before we even contemplate the idea that we can get this problem resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. All right, I think we have time for one more question before we go to the closing statements. This question is about gun violence, and it's, again, from the audience. And Delegate Gutierrez will be the first to respond. In the past few years, we have all seen too many gun deaths, and the victims of gun violence need advocacy. So what is your experience advocating for the victims of gun violence? And then I would add to that, could you talk a little bit about what approach you would take regarding this issue in Congress? Delegate Gutierrez.
Well, I've been more than an advocate. I've been a legislator taking the opportunity to present legislation in our incredibly strong Maryland gun control laws. I had focused on the issue of gun violence before we were ready to move forward. But there was a moment in which leadership and the general public came together with a terrific bill made up of many different individual proposals. My proposal that made it into law was the one that reduced the number of bullets in a cartridge to 10. That limits the lethal power of guns. My other proposal was to ensure that if you lost your gun, you had 48 hours to report that. That's made a huge difference for police to be able to track these guns.
Thank you.
I will continue doing that kind of fight.
Thank you,
in
Delegate
Congress.
Gutierrez.
Thank
Senator
you.
Reskin.
Yes. Let's see. In 2013, then Senator, now Attorney General Brian Frosch and I put together a comprehensive gun safety package after the catastrophe that took place at Newtown, Connecticut. And a bill I'd been putting in to ban military-style assault weapons was part of it. That passed. Another provision that I put in to say that if a gun is lost or stolen, it's got to be reported to law enforcement within 48 hours or it's a misdemeanor. That passed. We passed the toughest gun safety law in America, including fingerprint licensing for all handgun purchasers. In this session, I've introduced legislation which compels all convicted domestic offenders to surrender their firearms at the point of conviction, because the chances of a woman or a child being killed go up 500% in a domestically abusive household if there is a gun that's present. I have two other bills which have also been endorsed by the gun safety groups.
Raskin. Delegate Barve.
Yes, thank you. As the House Democratic leader, I was the floor leader for finding the votes in committee and on the House floor to pass every bit of that legislation that was described to you. And this year, we're going to make sure that if you're on the no-fly list, you won't be able to get a gun permit. This is how we work together as a team, as Democrats who are committed to really stopping gun violence. I genuinely believe that the nation has hit a tipping point. I genuinely believe that we can defeat the NRA once and for all. Do not give up hope. Help is on the way.
Thank you, Delegate Barve. Dan Bowling.
You know, Jamie has done so much in this field that we never have enough time to complete the list of what he's accomplished, and I like to complete his list for him. I attended a session that he scheduled a couple of months ago in Silver Spring. 100 people came, tremendous turnout on the topic of gun safety. And one of the big take-home lessons was that we should talk about gun safety, not gun control, that there is plenty of support among NRA members for that. I would just add that the state of Washington is doing quite a good job of testing whether increased taxation, as we did to depress tobacco consumption, will be a way to depress sales of guns and ammunition. But my kudos to Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. David Trone.
Every day in America, 191 people are gunned down across the country. It's a national tragedy. It affects people of color, and it affects disproportionately, and it affects our young people, as 60% of those are suicides. We have to find solutions. It's not easy. It's one step at a time. 87% of Americans agree we need these basic measures of gun safety, gun control. We need to work with others to make that happen. I have contacts and businesses in 101 congressional districts across America, from Phoenix to Miami to Seattle. We need to sit down with those folks and begin to move America in the direction we have to go.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. David Anderson.
It's a no-brainer to Democrats what needs to be done. We don't want people having automatic rifles. We don't want high-capacity magazines. We need the background checks. The problem is the Republicans have been, impossible to deal with on Capitol Hill. And for all the great work that's been done in Annapolis, and Jamie certainly is the leader, the truth is that Annapolis and Washington may be in driving distance of each other, but they're a million miles apart in terms of how they function. You know what needs to be done psychologically? Baby steps with the Republicans. You got to say to them, look, we recognize the Second Amendment of the Constitution. We're not trying to repeal it. We do think people have a right to a handgun and a hunting rifle. You got to gradually work with them and deal with their fears before you bring them major gun violence legislation, which will not pass in the near term. It's just not going to happen. It's total fantasy. We've got to accept the realistic
Mr.
agenda
Anderson.
here.
Will Jawando.
I mentioned earlier when I was 12 years old, I lost one of my best friends in my neighborhood to gun violence. I think part of how we move this conversation forward is a real story. I also lost many people in my dad's family during the Biafran Civil War. That's why he came to this country. On the flip side of that, my mom's a white woman from Kansas who had guns all over her farm town. And I think what we're going to need for this is a bridge builder, somebody who can talk to both sides and make actual change on the issue. He's right in that Washington's not Annapolis. It's going to take people that can work with Republicans. But you got to bring a real life story to it. And that's what I think I'd bring on this issue as an advocate, as a civil rights lawyer, as someone who's worked in the White House and in Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Giwando. Joel Rubin.
As a father of 3 little girls, I'm very scared about how this is all playing out across our country. And if we want to honor the victims, we should actually do something about it. When 9/10 of the American people really do want to see meaningful background checks, that means that there is a failure in the political will at the leadership in Congress. And I have taken on tough fights over the years, promoting diplomacy when it was not popular, against the Democrats as well as against the Republicans. We need to do the same thing with the NRA. Let's be blunt, call a spade a spade. The NRA is tying in knots the congressional process. We're going to lose Barbara Mikulski soon as a senator from here on the Appropriations Committee as well. That is where you get things done. The NRA has run circles around Democrats on the appropriations process, and we need to fight tooth and nail in the legislative process on Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Kathleen Matthews.
All of us here on the stage agree that we need tougher gun safety laws. How many in the audience agree we need tougher gun safety laws? Raise your hand. So this is why I'm proud to be a Democrat, because we agree on this. The question is, how do we get it done? Because Capitol Hill is not Annapolis, where you have a supermajority of Democrats. And so this is where I would bring my skills as a storyteller, as a communication strategist, somebody who for 30 years was a reporter who covered gun shootings and gun deaths nearly every day of the week. And we have to bring those stories, we have to make the case, we have to reach over to the other side. I would bring my relationships developed as a reporter, both with Democrats and Republicans, to try to build the consensus and the case to get this done moving forward. It begins not only with closing the loopholes, but also funding ATF, which has had no raises, no more agents to be able to enforce the gun safety laws. That's where we need to begin.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. So now we go to closing statements. Each person has 1 minute. Start with Senator Raskin.
Thank you very much, League of Women Voters, a great legacy of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Few things. Several of my distinguished colleagues up here have chided me, and I think Kumar and Anna too, saying Annapolis isn't Washington, that they know a lot more about how the world works than we really do. You know, Annapolis isn't Washington, and I'm glad of it. In Annapolis, we get things done. We make things happen, and we've proven over the last decade that we can have breakthroughs on the major policy questions of our time, including marriage equality, the death penalty, greenhouse gas emissions, the Second Chance Act, restoring voting rights to the ex-felons. So there are people who pride themselves on the fact that they were staffers in a deadlocked, paralyzed Washington. I urge them, before they try to go to Congress, to come on out to Annapolis to see how you can get things done. Secondly, public office isn't something that you buy. It's something that you earn through your devotion to the public good and your service to the community. And I would put my record of public service up against anybody running for Congress in America right now. And finally, the point of respect, Mr. Trone, he interjected the word respect. I wasn't quite sure what he was referring to, but I know driving up here, we saw lots of illegal Trone signs placed all over the roads in Montgomery County and Frederick County. And I urge you, Mr. Trone, I urge you, you are stuffing our mailboxes, the TV airwaves and the radio airwaves with your ads. At least give us the public airways. That's what the law says. It's for everybody. It's not for one candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin. Delegate Barve.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying that to many of these issues, the beginning point of progress is to win back the House of Representatives with a Democratic majority. None of these things can be accomplished without that. And as a Democratic leader, as a person who's been a leader on renewable energy, by the way, 15% of the electricity in this room is renewable because I was able to convince a Republican governor named Ehrlich to agree to it as a policy. All of these progressive policies happened because we had a majority in our legislature. And I have to emphasize this. You know, it's all very high-minded to talk about baby steps with the Republicans. No, I'm sorry. We need to have majorities. And just as I have as a Democratic majority leader, recruiting, training, and helping Democrats win elections throughout, I think Steve Slater is here. We came close, but in any case, just as it was my duty to make sure that we won elections at the state level, you elect me to be a member of Congress, and that's going to be my top agenda item because everything flows out of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Barve. Dan Bowling.
long before I founded a cancer immunotherapy company, and long before I negotiated multi-million-dollar deals for the life sciences division of GE Healthcare, and long before I hired my first 7 employees for my Earth shoe store as an undergraduate at Indiana University, I had a Quaker upbringing. And when I hear politicians think that everything has to be a fight, my experience tells me otherwise. When I see that in Nebraska, and I know you're sick of hearing Nebraska, but if you go on my website, you will be intrigued by the Atlantic and Politico and NPR, that you have a red state leading us to a new structure for Congress where we don't have parties dictating how the members must vote, but we have freedom for members to vote according to their conscience and according to the merit of bills. You are right to be skeptical, but please take your skepticism to my website, read what I have quoted there from Atlantic and Politico and NPR, and then tell me in an email why I'm wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. So now David Trona. And Mr. Trona, I'm going to give you an extra 15 seconds so you have a little bit extra time to respond to Senator Raskin's accusation that your supporters have been planting signs illegally.
Clearly, we have a lot of volunteers, and if the volunteers overstep their bounds, we're working on that. But thank you for your help, Jamie, for pointing that out.
I believe some of your volunteers are paid.
Some are paid, some are volunteers, correct. The next elections, this is not about the next election. It should be about the next generation. The next generation isn't about a couple of road signs that someone put up. We ought to try and think about the big stuff in America, moving our country forward. We ought to be thinking about things like jobs. We've created 5,000 jobs, I get it. We ought to think about education. That's what we need to pick America up across the country. We need to think about criminal justice. The average education of folks in prison is 4th grade. We need to do better there, and we haven't done better. And we need to think that Washington is not Annapolis. There's 11 senators that are Republicans in Annapolis. It's a 3-to-1 majority. Washington's quite different. We need to work together across the aisle, and we need to stop the insidious money of lobbyists and PACs, and that's why I'm taking no money, not $1, from lobbyists, not $1 from PACs, and no more than $10 from any individual. And that's the only person in that mission.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. David Anderson.
I've knocked on doors 29 times in Frederick County and 14 times in Carroll County. 14 different towns. My values have more in common with the families and the seniors in Frederick and Carroll than they do with the Montgomery County liberal establishment. I am the most qualified person to represent the 3 counties because I'm most like you and because I have focused my campaign on you. Now, my campaign is basically about passion, logical thinking, and common sense. My chief policies, my family policy and my policy on Social Security, each sensitive to uniting the generations, reach out to both sides of the aisle. If you want to end polarization and dysfunction in Washington, then you have to elect someone who believes that we need policies which speak to both sides. I am the least liberal person in this pack, but I am the most inclusive by including stay-at-home parents in my family policy and by including the 2 neglected counties in this district, Frederick County and Carroll County. Thank you.
Thank you,
I ask for
Mr.
your
Anderson.
vote.
Will Jawando.
I'm going to be innovative and stand up because my legs are tired. Who's best to represent you in this seat? That's the question. And I would submit to you that you want someone who's going to look to our future and who's dealing with the challenges working families are facing and also has the experience moving the agenda forward in Washington. If you talk about the issues facing us today, we didn't talk about a lot of them. Child care. I have 3 kids under 5. I know how much it costs, trust me. If you talk, then experience. I expanded Head Start when I worked on the Senate Education Committee to the highest number of slots ever, early childhood education program. We still have more to do. If you talk about student debt, my wife and I have $160,000 in student loans. That was mentioned by a reporter, so it's public information. But I also worked in the Congress to lower student interest rates from 8 to 6 and expand Pell Grants to the highest number ever. If you talk about health care and Social Security, my dad had to move in with us 2 years ago when he came down with cancer and lost his job because he didn't have paid sick leave and had too many doctor's appointments. So I understand what it is to take care of an elderly parent and work in Congress to pass health care when I was in the White House with President Obama. Put someone in Congress who understands what working families are going through. That's who's best, and that's who's going to think about the future.
Thank you, Mr. Giwando. Joel Rubin.
I like Will's idea. Friends, I'm not going to get in the mud like what we just saw. We have enough of that in Washington. We don't need to send more of that back to the Capitol. We need to move away from that kind of politics. And what I'm proposing is to actually go there and represent you. We have a lot to get done. There are crucial issues to stopping climate change, to ensuring that we have retirement security. In 20 years, Social Security will be insolvent. This is not a joke. We have to worry about women, and will women have the choice to control their actual bodies? I have 3 daughters. My mother-in-law lives with us, my wife. I don't want a politician telling them what to do. We have 2 visions of America right now at the national level, and we're watching it. Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to rip this country apart. We cannot let them do that. And we can't play into it either. We have to be different. We have to be better. And experience does matter. The Frederick News Post said that experience matters when it interviewed me. Nearly 20 years of federal service does matter in getting the job done in Washington. And I thank you all for being here today and hope that you'll vote for me on April 26th.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Kathleen Matthews.
I think Will started a movement here. First of all, I am so grateful to the League and to Hood College for giving all of us this chance today to earn your votes. I'm also really grateful to my interns from Hood College and Middletown High School. If you're here, please stand up. Thanks for passing out brochures for me. And to some of the people who are here who hosted some of my many meet and greets up here. Bev Byron, Maggie Hayes, thank you for your loyalty. This is really a very important election because you're talking about the successor to Chris Van Hollen, who has been a beloved and incredibly effective member of Congress, serving all of you. I served this area, Frederick County, as well as Montgomery County, for 30 years as a reporter, telling your stories, representing your interests, and being your voice. For the past 9 years, I had a chance to be an advocate for women, for minorities, for the LGBTQ community, but also for disadvantaged youth in this area and around the world, bringing them into jobs in the travel and tourism industry. And I look forward to having the chance to serve all of you in Congress. It's an important time. We need more women's voices if we're going to have more women's choices, and I hope you'll consider that as well when you make that important vote on April 26th.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. And wrapping it up for us, Delegate Gutierrez.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a wonderful moderator we have had. I want to thank everybody for coming today and giving us this opportunity. It's so important, I think, for us to be willing to come before you and share our ideas, share who we are, because on April 26th, you have a very important decision to make. You're going to be electing one of us to go to Congress. And you know, for that job, I really think experience matters. I think it's important for you to have someone that knows what are the issues that are important to you and to our state. I offer to you that I bring probably the most experience. I have local, state, and federal experience. I served on the local school board. I dealt with 8 budgets and all the problems of school construction, closing the gaps. At the state level, I've been there for 14 years, looking at all the issues that you've heard us talk about today. It's not enough to tell a story. You have to be actually involved in finding the solutions. I worked at the federal level with President Clinton, at the highest level, during a time when it was very difficult because the Gingrich Revolution had taken place. I bring to you that experience, and I hope you'll remember my name. It goes from A to Z, Ana Sol Gutierrez. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I want to have a big round of applause for all the candidates. It takes, we should give them credit. It takes a lot of time and hard work and a lot of hassles to run for office, but democracy wouldn't work without it. So thank you to them, and thank you to Hood College and the League of Women Voters.
Thank you to you as well. Thanks, Bob.